Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing very well today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on The Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the graduation from thinking with a finite mortal mind to knowing with the divine mind. Listen as we explain some of the differences between corporeal sense and spiritual idea. In this show, we will discuss the process in human development which leads to divine revelation. From the Bible, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, in quotes, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. End of quote. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and live out from the divine principle. So the title of today's show is A Better Use of Mind. Now, tell us, what do we mean by that?
Yeah, we've done several shows on mind, and I took the time to really make a list of everything. And the first one we did was on March 26, 2014, and it was titled Your Mind on Kriya Yoga. It's very interesting for me to listen to some of the shows we did before we were introduced to Christian Science, and I can see how we were void of the divine principle and still working with thought and belief, willing to change finite bad to finite good. At that time, I had a very limited understanding of the mortal mind without any knowledge of the divine mind. And the next show we did on mind was August 27th, 2014, titled Sun and Moon in Virgo and Development of the Lower Mind. The next one we did was November 19th, 2014, titled New Moon in Sagittarius and the Higher Mind. The fourth show we did was on 9/4/2017, titled Train the Mind to Serve Spirit. Now, this was the first show that we did after Christian Science influence, and you could start to see the difference that it had on our information. And then the fifth show we did was on March 12th, 2018, titled Artificial Intelligence versus Divine Mind. Here, we're conscious of the divine creation and the one mind along with the divine principle of one being. On June 6, 2020, we did the show titled Lost My Mind and Came to My Senses. The seventh show that we did was on May 31st, 2021. It was titled When Mind Doesn't Matter. The eighth show we did was on November 15th, 2021. It was called Artificial Intelligence Shadowing Divine Mind. The ninth show was on November 22nd, 2021, When the Mind Serves Spirit. The 10th show we did was on October 10th, 2022, The Language of Divine Mind. Today, I want to try and organize this information into something more comprehensive by arranging statements with facts and a procedure in development. Last week we talked about the physical body as a mental image, and that the more divinely mental, the more harmonious and indestructible it will appear. How we think is what we become. And today we'll talk about the 3 modes of mortal thought, overcome, and letting divine mind take over the scientific government of the body.
So I do have a question earlier when you were talking about that we were working with thought and belief, willing to change finite bad to finite good. What does that actually mean? Are you talking as an explanation of duality?
Well, what we're talking about is the entire human experience is world thought broadcasted, disguised and accepted as personal thought. Humans are hypnotized, walking in a dream state. And basically what we want to learn is how to break the spell. We can get awakened by one who's conscious of divine truth. But if you don't have the privilege of such company, then we must master the mind-body complex, purify the human consciousness, and bury it in the silence and stillness of divine revelation. What we weren't talking about or even conscious of is that the entire mental material concept of life is the false sense of existence. It's the sin. It is what misses the mark. And it runs on a belief in 2 powers. Now, in order for us to graduate to spiritual identity, we have to overcome the belief in the 2 powers, the belief in the many. And we must know ourselves in the way that we're known by the Creator, which is whole, complete, fulfilled. The human experience is a divided consciousness. We're out of the Father's house. We're a branch cut off from the vine. And for us to climb back into divine consciousness, back into the Father's house, we're starting to find that it's not that easy. The idea of putting off the old man. And one of the things we talk about a lot is you hear about thousands of people that are spiritually awakened, and yet they're not reaping the benefits, all of the privileges that should come with this spiritual awakening. And so there's a reason for it. And the reason is that we have not broken the dream. We have not come out of the hypnotic state. We haven't overcome the mortal mind. The divine creative principle is right here, it's right now, and it's functioning. But we must be conscious of it. And then we're learning thinking about it is not the same as being conscious of it. There are these modes of thinking we have to understand, we have to master, and graduate from thinking with this mortal mind, a separate mind, and merge it with this one mind. And then let the divine mind take over the scientific government of your being.
All right, Swami, so I think we all want to break the spell or break the dream, as you say, master the mind-body complex, and as you said, purify human consciousness, burying it in silence and stillness. So how do we go about to do all that? It sounds like there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Right. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I really like the Kriya Yoga we teach, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Kriya Yoga, as we teach it, is a path of action, it's a path of knowledge, it's a path of devotion. It has its own physiology, it has its own psychology and supportive philosophical concepts. And one of the things that I discovered is that it dovetails with Christian Science, which is what really gave me the insight, gave me the information needed to graduate from thinking about the divine creative principle to getting to the point where you believe in something and now it's starting to materialize. You're starting to have faith in the divine creative principle, which means that you're externalizing it. You're starting to see the divine qualities manifesting in your experiences. And what we're aspiring to is to understand the divine principle, because that's what Christian Science is. Oftentimes people think a Christian Scientist is one who belongs to a church. But as Mary Baker Eddy insisted, a Christian Scientist is one who demonstrates divine law with scientific certainty. And it's just such an incredible discovery that she has made, because she figured out what Jesus was doing with his miracles. And it has everything to do with understanding the difference between Jesus and the Christ, because Jesus was the manifestation of the Christ, but the Christ is an eternal principle. Jesus ascended, and Jesus is no longer in appearance, but the Christ never left. The Christ is the saving aspect of truth. It is what makes the divine creation comprehensive to human consciousness. And to know this truth is to demonstrate it. That's why the message of the Christ was heal the sick, reform sinner, raise the dead. That's what Jesus called preaching the gospel. It always reminds me of what I had heard St. Francis had said. Preach the gospel, and when necessary, use words.
So you talked about the divine principle. What is exactly the divine principle according to Christian Science?
The divine principle is the allness of the divine spirit. Spirit is all, and there is no other. Spirit is the only reality. And it operates under the law of one power, not two powers. There is no opposition in spirit. Spirit is whole, it's absolute, it's complete. And that's why the quote-unquote mortal mind can't bring forth the divine image, because it works in duality. It runs on a belief in two powers. It runs because of separation from unity. Because when something manifests, it manifests in half, leaves behind a complementary, unmanifested other part. And so the more you understand how these things work, the easier it is for you to educate your thought up to spiritual apprehension, where you're then able to walk reason through the open door of revelation.
Now, do we need to know what the three modes of mortal thought are in order for us to do that?
Well, from my perspective, I would say yes. I would say it's very helpful if you have imagery. It's one of the reasons why I use the logo that we use for our business as a template for, quote unquote, the astral mental body, the body of Christ. And to substantiate that, if you go to Revelation in the Bible, it seems to dovetail with all of that symbolism that we use. The man, the bull, the lion, the eagle, the 12 tribes that surround the throne, the 24 elders. These are all images that we use in our teaching of Kriya Yoga. And primarily because if you have a map, it makes it a whole lot easier for you to attain your destination. As opposed to if you're trying to hold things together mentally while you're breaking the material moorings and rising into this larger sense of self.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners will be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So let's get back to our discussion about the 3 modes of mortal thought.
Yeah, this idea that we can get awakened by one who is conscious of the divine truth. But if you don't have that privilege, then we must master the mind-body complex, purify the human consciousness, and bury it in the silence and stillness of divine revelation. These 3 modes of mortal thought are found in the astrological image. The lower mind is Gemini, instinct, appetite, survival, fear. Virgo is the mid-mind, human intelligence, the 4 mental functions, perception, reason, memory, intuition. And Sagittarius is the higher mind, world thought, the collective consciousness, all driven by a belief in 2 powers. And I like to use the resurrection of Lazarus as the map for attaining the ascended consciousness, apply all of the symbolism. And in order to really get a grasp of that, I have a sound bite here that I'd like to play. To use the symbolism of the resurrection of Lazarus to help us understand what we are doing. Let's unbox it. Lazarus is the purified human consciousness. Martha is the physical appearance of matter and form we call body. Mary is the belief and concept we call finite mortal mind. Jesus is Christ, the saving aspect of truth. Let's start. The sisters write Jesus to alert him, symbolizing a stirring in the mind-body complex, seeking the divine self. Lazarus is put in the tomb. The false sense of self must be buried in the silence and stillness of divine revelation before Christ can come to the purified human consciousness. Martha greets Jesus. Matter and form are attuned to the divine idea. Martha goes within and gets Mary. Mary comes out. Belief and concept are attuned to the divine idea. Martha and Mary present Lazarus to Jesus, and Christ comes to Lazarus and calls the purified consciousness out as the risen Christ. The joining of spirit with truth brings the light of divine eternal life, revealing the nothingness of anything unlike divine perfection. So for me, Martha and Mary become the role of the mind-body complex in Revelation. The idea of attuning the mind-body complex, the body and mortal mind to the divine idea, or educating thought up to spiritual apprehension. There's preparatory work before we can bury the purified human consciousness in the tomb, remembering that unless false sense is buried, Christ can't come. And without Christ, there's no principle to demonstrate and no rule to demonstrate it with. So you start to see the relativity. That old Ben Franklin, for the want of a nail, a shoe is lost. The want of a shoe, a horse is lost. For the want of a horse, a rider is lost. For the want of a rider, a platoon is lost. For the want of a platoon, a battle is lost. For the want of a battle, a war is lost. For something as insignificant as the loss of a nail on a shoe, we find something as monumental as the loss of a war. And you're going to find with divine science, this relativity is pivotal. If you do not pay attention to the details, if you think you don't have to master the mind-body complex, that you just dismiss the mind-body complex, you'll probably find or experience what in Revelations they call looks like a lamb, speaks like a dragon.
Swami, you said that we need to understand that unless the false sense is buried, Christ can't come. Can you remind us what you mean by false sense?
Yeah, the entire human experience. Remember, Mary Baker Eddy figured this out reading the Bible. You start with Genesis 1, and there is the divine creation. God makes everything. Everything is very good. You get to Genesis 2, and then there's this secondary creation, where the Lord God makes Adam out of the clay of the earth and Eve out of the rib of Adam, and then there's that whole fall from Eden. Well, that entire secondary creation is the dream state. That's the dream of Adam. And we're born into that. Now, Adam and Eve had the option. They were born in the divine creation, and then they chose to eat from one of the other trees beside the tree of life, which was the only tree that they were supposed to eat from. We're born into this false sense of existence. And so we need to separate from being individualized by that world mind, which is the belief in two powers, and then we have to rejoin with the divine principle, the omnipresent, invisible, intangible, spiritual substance of true reality. That's a Herculean task. And without leadership, when you're trying to do this from a book, and unless the book you're using is Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, I would say your chances of doing this become slim to none, because the thing I got the most out of Christian Science was this idea of demonstration. You go along and you prove the presence of this divine principle. You work with a very simple formula. How we think is what we become, but then you understand there are three modes of mortal thought, but then there is divine mind. You don't just stop thinking. When consciousness is no longer influenced by the material senses, we become unconscious. When you become conscious of the Christ, you are no longer conscious of your five material senses, but you're not unconscious, you're Christ conscious. You're conscious of the divine principle. That's what has the power. And if you're not an educated consumer and you're trying to do this left to your own devices, it becomes really difficult. One of the things that we try and do is help people by providing this kind of information because it's a map.
Again, you mentioned the three modes of mortal thought, and I know in the past we've talked about that as it relates to revelations in the Bible.
Yeah, in Revelations in the Bible, it's the dragon and two beasts. And one of the things that you're going to understand about this is it's been recommended that we must come out of or overcome this barrier, this veil. But there's a big difference between mastering and killing. Because we need the beast to ride into Jerusalem. It's the idea of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on the colt of an ass, or even Lao Tzu riding the bull. You don't slay the bull, you ride it into town. You don't kill the physical body, but you must master it. Instinct, appetite, preservation, survival, fear has a purpose. But if we don't master it and we anesthetize it or we kill it, then we lose the benefit of having it. Or the other thing is like Jesus said, soon it will be night, when no one can work. Now it is day, I must do the work of him that has sent me. The idea of having a physical body, spiritually speaking, is day. And so using your physical body, because it's going to give you wonderful clues that will help you determine what you are conscious of. Because when we're groping around in consciousness, to know the difference between the lower mind, the mid mind, the higher mind, and divine mind becomes very challenging.
So I'm going to summarize that verse that I read in the opening. And as a matter of fact, I'll read it again. This is again 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. Casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. End of quote. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is what we were talking about, this idea of casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God. Anything that does not have divine qualities was not made by the divine principle and therefore is a lie. It's not real. And if we believe that it is, then we give it a life that it doesn't have. Spirit is the only self-existent power in this universe. Everything else gets its appearance of power from belief. That's why when we first started out, we worked with belief and thought. But what we found is we were changing finite bad to finite good, which soon became finite bad because you're in the cycle of death and rebirth. You're not in reality. And so in order to find liberation from this cycle, we have to grasp onto something that's outside of it. And spirit, the absolute, is the only thing that you can grab onto that doesn't have opposite. And then learning, well, what does that look like when I do it? What does it look like when I accept myself to be the divine principle? I am. The only life there is the divine creative principle functioning everywhere, always. And it's the only life I am.
That will end our program for today. Listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On any of the pages, when you scroll down, you'll see several buttons there that you can press to further your understanding. Swami, any final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and live out from the divine principle. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.